Welcome back to the channel, where ordinary stories always turn out to be not so ordinary after all. Today, we travel back to the summer of 1992. To a quiet city in Missouri, United States, where a mystery began that continues to baffle investigators, journalists, and everyday people even 3 decades later. This is the story of the Springfield Three. Springfield, at that time, was not a place where you would expect national headlines. It was a mid-sized city, home to families, students, and retirees, with a reputation for being peaceful and predictable. But on June 7, 1992, that sense of normal life was shaken forever. 3 women, a mother, her daughter, and her daughter's close friend vanished without a trace from their own home. What makes this disappearance so haunting is not only that 3 lives seemed to evaporate overnight, but also the eerie state in which their home was found. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your loved ones were gone, their cars still parked in the driveway, their purses and belongings sitting exactly where they had left them, and the house itself showing no sign of struggle or forced entry. The lights were on, the beds had been slept in, and yet the people who should have been inside were nowhere to be found. It felt as if the 3 women had been carefully lifted out of their lives, leaving behind an unsettling stillness. This was not a case of people choosing to leave quietly, nor was it a situation that fit neatly into an explanation. From the very beginning, the Springfield police were faced with more questions than answers. How could 3 individuals vanish from the same location at the same time, without anyone noticing? Why were there no clear clues to follow, and what could have possibly happened in those dark hours between late night and early morning? As the hours stretched into days, and the days into weeks, the local community grew more anxious. Neighbors organized searches, volunteers combed through woods and fields, and flyers with smiling faces were taped to every available surface around town. The case captured national attention because it challenged the most basic sense of safety, that your own home is the one place where you are supposed to feel secure. 30-plus years later, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. It has inspired countless theories, books, television specials, and investigative deep dives. Yet the answers remain just out of reach. Was it a carefully planned abduction? Was it the work of someone they knew, or a complete stranger, or is the truth something even more unexpected? In today's story, we will begin by retracing that night in June 1992, step by step, to see how what started as a normal evening for 3 women turned into one of the most baffling disappearances in modern American history. To understand the gravity of this mystery, we first need to know who these 3 women were. They were not celebrities, nor people living on the edge of society. They were ordinary individuals, each with their own dreams, responsibilities, and routines. And perhaps that is what makes their story even more chilling, the reminder that something extraordinary can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. The eldest was Cheryl Levitt, a 47-year-old single mother. By all accounts, Cheryl was hardworking, caring, and devoted to her family. She had built a life in Springfield as a cosmetologist, known for her friendly personality and her dedication to her clients. Friends described her as reliable and down-to-earth, someone who valued both her work and her role as a mother. Her home, modest but comfortable, was a place of warmth, the kind of home where family and friends often gathered. Cheryl was at a stage in life where she looked forward to stability, supporting her daughter as she prepared to step into adulthood. Her daughter, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, was just 19 years old. Blonde-haired and lively, Susie had recently graduated from high school. She was full of energy, social, and always surrounded by friends. Like many young women her age, she was exploring her identity, making plans for the future, and enjoying the excitement of newfound independence. Friends recall her as outgoing, funny, and kind-hearted, someone who could light up a room with her personality. At the time of her disappearance, Susie was looking forward to new chapters in life, but she also carried the deep bond she had with her mother. Alongside them was Stacy McCall, 18 years old, and one of Susie's closest friends. Stacy had also just graduated from high school, and she and Susie had spent the evening of June 6 celebrating with classmates. Stacy was described as gentle, thoughtful, and a bit quieter than Susie. But the two balanced each other perfectly. She came from a loving family and had been making plans for the future as well, including a trip to a water park with friends the very next day. She had every reason to look forward with hope and excitement, standing right at the edge of adulthood. Together, the three women represented three different stages of life: a mother in mid-adulthood, her daughter on the threshold of independence, and a best friend stepping into the same new world. Their lives intersected in a way that seemed so natural and ordinary. On that June night, there was nothing unusual about them being together in Cheryl's home. In fact, it was a scene that could have played out in countless households across the country: a mother and daughter, joined by a friend, settling in after a night of celebration. And yet, it was this exact combination of people, in that exact place, that would become the center of one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. By the morning of June 7, 1992, all three had disappeared, leaving behind only questions, heartache, and the kind of silence that still echoes today. June 6, 1992, was supposed to be a night of joy and celebration. For high school seniors across Springfield, it marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Graduation had just taken place, and like countless other teens across America, the night was reserved for parties, laughter, and plans for the future. For Suzanne "Susie" Streeter and Stacy McCall, this was a milestone they had been waiting for. Both young women had worked hard to reach this moment, and now they were stepping out into the world with excitement. The evening began with a string of graduation parties, moving from one friend's house to another, joining classmates who were all eager to savor the last hours of being together before life began, pulling them in different directions. Witnesses from that night later remembered Susie and Stacy as being in high spirits. They were surrounded by friends, smiling, and enjoying themselves in the carefree way that only teenagers on the brink of adulthood can. These parties were not unusual. In fact, they were exactly the kind of gathering you would expect after graduation: small groups of friends, music playing, people sharing stories, and the hopeful feeling of a bright future ahead. As the night wore on, Stacy and Susie made plans. Their original idea had been to spend the night at another friend's house, but as it often happens with teenagers, plans shifted. By the time the evening ended, both young women decided instead to go back to Susie's house, where her mother, Cheryl, would be waiting. It was a practical choice: quieter, more comfortable, and closer to where they needed to be the next morning. After all, Stacy had plans with friends to visit a water park the following day, and she wanted a good night's rest before the trip. Nothing about this decision seemed unusual. It was the kind of last-minute change that happens all the time, and no one could have predicted it would mark the beginning of a mystery that has never been solved. Around midnight, the girls left the party scene and made their way toward Cheryl's home on East Delmar Street. The night was calm, ordinary, and uneventful, at least from what anyone could recall. What makes this moment so haunting in hindsight is how normal it all seemed. Graduation nights across the country have played out in almost identical ways for generations. Young people celebrating freedom, staying out late, laughing with friends, and then heading home to rest before the next adventure. For Susie and Stacy, This night should have been remembered as a joyful memory at the start of adulthood. Instead, it became the last confirmed time anyone outside their family ever saw them alive. By the early hours of June 7th, they were home, ready to sleep after a long evening. Their cars would later be found parked outside, their belongings untouched inside. Everything suggested that they had arrived safely. But as the hours ticked by, what seemed like an ordinary night turned into the beginning of one of the most baffling disappearances in modern history. By the early hours of June 7, 1992, Cheryl Levitt, her daughter Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, and Susie's friend Stacy McCall had all settled into the modest home on East Delmar Street. To any outsider, the small brick house looked perfectly ordinary, the kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened. Inside, however, the stage was being set for one of the most puzzling disappearances in American history. The decision for Susie and Stacy to return there after the graduation parties seemed logical. They were tired, and the excitement of the night had run its course. Cheryl's home offered a safe place to sleep, familiar and quiet, a contrast to the noise of the celebrations. Stacy had her trip to the water park planned for the following day, and both she and Susie wanted to rest before joining their friends again in the morning. For Cheryl, it was simply another night her daughter was home. Her daughter's friend was welcome, and there was no reason to suspect that anything unusual would happen. But when morning arrived, the ordinary flow of life fractured. Friends and family members expected to hear from the women. Stacy's mother, in particular, became concerned when she could not reach her daughter. Stacy was known to keep in touch, and with the day's plans ahead, silence was unusual. Calls to the house went unanswered, and as the hours stretched on, worry turned into alarm. By late morning, people began stopping by the Delmar Street house to check in. What they discovered inside was not chaos, but something far stranger. An unsettling stillness. All three women were gone, yet their personal belongings remained. Cheryl's purse, Susie's things, and Stacy's clothes and makeup were untouched. Their cars were still parked outside in the driveway. The family dog was found restless but unharmed. And the lights in the house were still on, as if someone had planned to return at any moment. What disturbed visitors most was not what they found, but what they did not find. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture. No obvious struggle. The only irregularity was a shattered porch light. And even that detail could not be clearly connected to what had happened. It was as if the three women had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a home frozen in time. The more people looked around, the stranger it seemed. Beds appeared to have been slept in, yet no one was there. Cigarettes that Cheryl usually smoked were left behind. Uncharacteristic for her to abandon. Stacy had left her overnight bag untouched. Something her family insisted she would not normally do. Everything suggested that the women had planned to stay, and yet, they were nowhere to be found. This eerie scene, discovered within hours of their disappearance, set the tone for the entire investigation that followed. For family, friends, and police, the question was immediate and chilling: how could three women vanish from a safe neighborhood, in the middle of the night, without leaving a single clear trace behind? By the morning of June 7, 1992, what should have been a normal Sunday quickly turned into the start of a nightmare. Friends and family expected to see Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, and Stacy McCall go about their day as usual. Instead, all three women had vanished without a trace. At first, it was confusion rather than panic. Calls went unanswered, and knocks on the door brought no reply. For parents, this kind of silence from their daughters was unusual, but no one immediately imagined the worst. After all, maybe they had stepped out early, or maybe they were simply oversleeping after the excitement of graduation night. Yet as the hours stretched on, that explanation no longer made sense. Stacy's family grew especially worried. She was supposed to meet her friends at a water park later that day. Stacy was responsible, someone who kept her word, and her parents knew she would not simply disappear without telling anyone. When multiple attempts to reach her failed, they drove to Cheryl's house themselves. What they found only deepened the mystery. The cars were still neatly parked outside. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything appeared strangely normal, almost as if the women had stepped away for just a moment. But they had not. The house was empty, their belongings untouched. Even the family dog was inside, restless but unharmed, waiting for someone to come home. It was this stark contrast, the normalcy of the setting against the complete absence of the people who should have been there, that unsettled everyone who entered the house. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken windows. The only oddity was that shattered porch light. It was not enough to explain anything. But it was just unusual enough to make visitors uneasy. As word spread among family and friends, more people arrived at the home throughout the day. The longer the house remained empty, the clearer it became that something was terribly wrong. By afternoon, the small circle of concern had grown into a wave of worry spreading across Springfield. Neighbors began asking questions. Had anyone seen Cheryl step outside that morning? Had anyone noticed Susie or Stacy leaving in the night? But the answer was always the same: no. The neighborhood had been quiet, uneventful. No one reported hearing anything unusual. The three women seemed to have disappeared in complete silence. By the end of that day, fear replaced confusion. Families contacted the police, hoping for answers. Officers who arrived at the scene quickly realized that this was not a case of people simply choosing to leave. Three women from 2 generations, with no reason to disappear, had gone missing at the same time, from the same house, without warning. What began as a quiet Sunday morning had now become the opening chapter of one of America's most haunting unsolved cases. The lives of 3 women had been interrupted in a way no one could explain, and Springfield would never be the same again. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Springfield Three case was not just that the women were gone, but that their lives appeared to have been paused in place. When investigators and family members looked through the house, they found that nearly everything the women might have needed was still there. For Cheryl Levitt, her purse, cigarettes, and car were untouched. Friends noted that she was a creature of habit, someone who rarely went anywhere without these essentials. The idea that she would leave her home, her car parked in the driveway, and her personal items behind was completely out of character. For Suzanne Susie Streeter, her things were exactly where she had left them. Her jewelry, makeup, and purse, all the small details of a teenager's daily routine, were undisturbed. It looked as though she had simply stepped away for a moment, expecting to come right back. For someone who had just graduated high school and was making plans for the future, the sudden abandonment of all her belongings made no sense. And then there was Stacy McCall. Her overnight bag, clothes, and toiletries remained neatly inside the house. Stacy's mother would later emphasize that her daughter was not the type to walk away without her things, especially when she had plans the very next day. The fact that her car was still there as well meant she had no way to get to the water park. No way to meet her friends as promised. For her family, this was the clearest sign yet that something was seriously wrong. The house itself reinforced the feeling of lives interrupted. The women's cars sat unused outside, side by side in the driveway. Their purses, with cash and identification still inside, were in plain view. Televisions and appliances were left on, giving the sense that the women had intended to return shortly. Even the family dog, restless but safe inside, seemed to be waiting for them. Taken together, these details painted a disturbing picture. It was not just that 3 people had disappeared, it was that they had disappeared without taking anything they would logically need. No wallets, no keys, no vehicles, no personal items. For investigators, this immediately suggested that whatever happened to the Springfield Three had not been voluntary. People leaving on their own do not abandon every single possession that grounds them in daily life. This chilling realization made the case all the more baffling. If they had not left on their own, then someone must have come into the house. But how, and why were there no signs of struggle? The scene suggested a sudden interruption, as if, in one brief moment, all 3 women were taken away before they had the chance to react. It is these abandoned belongings, still neatly in place, that have haunted investigators for decades. They stand as silent witnesses, frozen in time. A reminder that something extraordinary and terrifying happened within the walls of that quiet Springfield home. When police officers and family members examined the home on East Delmar Street more carefully, they were struck by what they did not see. For 3 people to vanish from the same house at the same time, one might expect some kind of evidence: broken locks, damaged windows, or at the very least, signs of a struggle. Yet inside Cheryl Levitt's home, there was nothing of the sort. The rooms were tidy, as if the night had ended peacefully. The beds appeared to have been slept in, clothing and personal items were in their usual places, and there was no overturned furniture, no stains, no broken glass. Doors were unlocked, but not damaged. It was almost unsettling how normal everything looked. The only irregularity was found outside a broken porch light. The glass from the bulb had shattered, scattering small pieces on the ground near the front door. Whether this detail was connected to the disappearance or merely a coincidence remains one of the lingering questions of the case. Some believed it might have broken accidentally, perhaps from someone brushing against it or trying to replace it. Others have speculated that it was intentionally smashed, possibly to create darkness around the entryway. Aside from this, however, there was nothing outwardly alarming. No neighbors recalled hearing shouting, crashes, or anything out of the ordinary during the night. In fact, the entire street was quiet. This lack of disturbance suggested that if something did happen, it was quick, silent, and expertly carried out. For investigators, this created a troubling scenario. If the women had been confronted, why were not there signs of resistance? If they had been tricked into leaving the house, how could that have happened in the middle of the night without raising suspicion? The mystery deepened as detectives realized the situation offered almost no physical evidence to work with. The condition of the house also added to the growing sense of fear in the community. A broken porch light might not sound like much, but combined with the disappearance, it became an eerie symbol of the unknown. The fact that the interior showed no damage suggested one of 2 unsettling possibilities: either the women had left voluntarily, perhaps under false pretenses, or they had been compelled to leave so swiftly that they did not have the chance to resist. Whichever explanation might be true, the normal appearance of the house gave families little comfort. In fact, it made things worse. An obvious struggle might have at least provided answers, but the absence of one left only questions. It was as if 3 people had simply been lifted out of their lives, leaving the house itself untouched, a stage perfectly set but without its actors. To this day, that house and its strange state remain central to the haunting puzzle of the Springfield Three. The broken light bulb and the silence inside speak louder than any noise ever could. On the morning of June 7, 1992, friends of Suzanne Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall began to arrive at the Levitt home. Graduation night had been long, and the girls had promised to regroup with friends the following day for a trip to the water park. When Stacy did not show up, her friends and family assumed she was simply running late. When they pulled up to the small brick house on East Delmar Street, everything seemed ordinary at first glance. The cars were there, parked neatly in the driveway. The lawn was quiet, the neighborhood calm, and nothing suggested that 3 people inside were missing. Even the front door was unlocked, which in Springfield at the time was not unusual. Many families in safe neighborhoods did not always lock their doors. Stepping inside, visitors found the house still and strangely normal. The living room was tidy. The TV was on. The beds had clearly been used, but otherwise nothing looked disturbed. Susie's and Stacy's purses were sitting nearby, their belongings intact. To those who entered, it seemed as though the women had just stepped out for a quick errand or were perhaps still sleeping in another room. At first, there was no real panic. Friends thought the trio might have gone out for breakfast or taken an early morning drive. Some even assumed they would walk back in at any moment, laughing at all the fuss. The calmness of the house gave the illusion of safety, lulling visitors into believing nothing terrible had happened. But as the hours went by, that illusion began to fade. Calls to the house rang unanswered. Repeated knocks on bedroom doors brought no response. Stacy's mother, who knew her daughter well, began to feel her first wave of dread. Stacy would never simply disappear without telling her family. The fact that her overnight bag was untouched, her swimsuit still packed, and her car still in the driveway made the situation increasingly suspicious. More friends stopped by throughout the day, each leaving with the same unsettled feeling. Something about the stillness of the house did not feel right. The lights being left on, the dog pacing anxiously inside. The purses abandoned. Each detail added weight to the sense that something was wrong. And yet, in those early hours, crucial time may have been lost. Believing there was no danger, some visitors even helped tidy up broken glass from the porch light, not realizing they might be disturbing potential evidence. This well-meaning but innocent act would later become one of the many frustrations for investigators, as the home's crime scene was unintentionally altered before police could conduct a full forensic sweep. What began as a casual morning visit by friends slowly turned into a collective realization: the women were not coming back. By afternoon, worry gave way to fear. The situation was no longer just unusual, it was alarming. 3 women had vanished, leaving behind a house that looked deceptively normal. And the clock was already ticking on one of Springfield's greatest mysteries. By the afternoon of June 7, 1992, what had started as quiet concern from family and friends escalated into an official police matter. Calls had been made, and officers from the Springfield Police Department arrived at the Levitt home to see for themselves. What they encountered was a situation unlike anything they had expected. 3 women gone. 3 cars still in the driveway, purses and personal belongings untouched, and no immediate explanation for any of it. From the very beginning, investigators were troubled. It was rare enough for one adult to disappear without warning, but 3 at the same time, from the same home, was nearly impossible to explain as voluntary. The lack of forced entry raised red flags. The women's valuables, including money and identification, were still there, making robbery an unlikely motive. The unlocked doors suggested that if someone had entered the home, it might have been someone the women trusted or someone who managed to approach them without raising alarm. As detectives began piecing together the details, the word that kept coming up was abduction. There was no evidence that the women had left willingly. Susie and Stacy had plans with friends the following day, and Cheryl had obligations at her job. None of them had reasons to vanish. To leave everything behind, including vehicles, purses, and even the family dog, was unthinkable. Still, one of the most perplexing details was the silence of the night. Neighbors had not reported hearing any screams, arguments, or disturbances. There were no signs of a violent struggle inside the home, no broken locks, no overturned furniture. If foul play had occurred, it had been swift and quiet. That level of control suggested to police that whoever was responsible knew exactly what they were doing. Investigators also noticed how quickly the situation had drawn people in. By the time police formally secured the scene, multiple friends and family members had already come and gone through the house earlier that day. Some had tidied up broken glass from the porch light. Others had moved items, and many had touched surfaces. This unintentional contamination complicated the investigation from the very start. What might have been valuable evidence could now have been altered or lost. Despite these challenges, detectives pressed forward. They interviewed neighbors, classmates, co-workers, anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual that night. Flyers were printed. Media outlets picked up the story, and the Springfield Three quickly became a headline across Missouri. Still, the mystery deepened with every passing hour. For police, the theory of a kidnapping was becoming the most plausible explanation. But even with that possibility in mind, they lacked the critical elements investigators rely on: eyewitnesses, physical evidence, or a clear motive. All they had was a house frozen in silence. 3 lives cut short in mid-motion, and a growing sense that the answers were slipping away just as quickly as the women themselves. The working theory of abduction gave urgency to the case, but it also left an entire community shaken. If 3 people could vanish from a quiet neighborhood without anyone noticing, what did that mean for everyone else? Once the possibility of abduction became the leading theory, the search for the Springfield Three intensified quickly. Local police, state authorities, volunteers, and even national media outlets became involved in what was rapidly turning into one of Missouri's most high-profile missing persons cases. The quiet city of Springfield, once known for its calm neighborhoods and family-friendly atmosphere, was suddenly the focus of nationwide attention. In the days following the disappearance, search efforts spread across the region. Officers scoured wooded areas, fields, and abandoned buildings. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning from above for anything unusual. Volunteers formed search parties, walking side by side through rural landscapes, calling out the women's names in the hope of hearing a response. Every possible lead, no matter how small, was pursued. Posters with the women's faces appeared everywhere. In shop windows, on telephone poles, in schools and churches. The image of 3 smiling women quickly became familiar not just to Springfield residents, but to people across the state. Families, friends, and strangers alike distributed flyers, desperate to keep the case in the public eye. Local television stations reported on the story daily, and national news programs soon picked it up as well. Tips began flooding in. Some callers claimed to have seen suspicious vehicles near the Levitt home that night. Others reported strangers acting oddly around Springfield. Still others shared rumors, theories, and second-hand stories. Police followed up on each one, but every path seemed to lead to a dead end. Without physical evidence from the home and without eyewitnesses to confirm any specific activity, investigators were left with speculation but no solid ground to stand on. The sheer lack of evidence was perhaps the most baffling part. In many missing persons cases, there is at least one clear clue: a footprint, a witness, a piece of physical evidence that points in a direction. Here, there was nothing. The house gave no answers. The neighborhood had heard nothing. Even with thousands of hours of searching and investigating, the women's trail seemed to vanish the moment the night ended. As weeks turned into months, the case remained at the forefront of Springfield's collective mind. Candlelight vigils were held, families pleaded for information on television, and investigators continued to chase leads. Yet with each passing day, the reality grew more painful. The disappearance of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy had left behind almost no trace at all. This silence, the absence of evidence, the absence of explanation, made the case even more haunting. It was as though the women had been lifted out of their lives and carried into a void where no clues could follow. For the families, the unanswered questions were unbearable. For police, the lack of progress was deeply frustrating. And for the community, the realization was chilling. If 3 women could vanish so completely, could it happen again? As days turned into months, and months into years, the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall refused to fade from public memory. The case was not just another entry in police files, it became a national talking point, an enduring symbol of how fragile a sense of safety could be. What began in a quiet Springfield neighborhood grew into one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. True crime television programs such as America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries featured the case, broadcasting it to millions of viewers across the country. Each retelling reignited interest and brought in new tips, but none of them cracked the mystery. Journalists wrote countless articles, local and national newspapers kept the story alive, and documentaries later revisited the case, always circling the same chilling truth. 3 women had vanished without leaving behind a single definitive clue. For the families, this lack of closure became its own form of suffering. Unlike tragedies where there are answers, even painful ones, the relatives of the Springfield Three were left with endless questions. Every phone call could be a lead, every anonymous tip a possible breakthrough. But time and again, hope would build only to collapse when investigations reached another dead end. The case also left a deep scar on the community itself. Springfield was no longer just a quiet Missouri city, it was now linked in the national imagination with one of the greatest modern mysteries. Residents locked their doors more carefully. Parents worried more about their children. People began to question how safe their neighborhoods really were. When something so unexplainable could happen in the middle of the night without a sound. What makes the Springfield Three case so haunting is not only the mystery of what happened, but also its completeness. Rarely do people vanish without leaving behind at least some trail. Here, it was as if the lives of 3 women had been paused. Their belongings frozen in place, and then erased from the timeline. No arrests were ever made. No bodies were ever found. No conclusive evidence ever surfaced. Decades later, the case continues to inspire theories. Some believe the women were victims of a carefully planned abduction. Others think they may have crossed paths with someone dangerous without realizing it. There are even theories involving multiple perpetrators, suggesting a coordinated effort to remove all 3 women without leaving evidence. Yet all of these remain speculation, because no one can prove what truly happened. The story of the Springfield Three has now become part of American true crime lore, a case studied in books, podcasts, and classrooms as an example of an investigation that defies resolution. It is a reminder that sometimes, no matter how much effort is poured into the search for truth, answers remain just out of reach. Even after more than 30 years, the Springfield Three are not forgotten. Their faces still appear on missing persons lists, their families still hope for closure. And their case still whispers across the decades as one of the darkest enigmas in American history. Today, more than 3 decades later, the mystery of Cheryl Levitt, Suzanne "Susie" Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains as unsettling as it was on that June morning in 1992. Their story has passed from breaking news headlines to history, yet it continues to capture the imagination of anyone who hears it. Generations who were not even alive at the time now learn about the case, reading it in books, hearing it in podcasts, or watching it unfold in documentaries. The haunting absence of answers has ensured that the case is remembered under a single, chilling name, the Springfield Three. This phrase has become more than just a description. It has become a symbol of lives interrupted, of a mystery unsolved, and of questions that still echo unanswered. Unlike many other criminal cases, where at least fragments of truth eventually come to light, this case has resisted closure at every turn. The home on East Del Mar Street no longer holds the same physical presence it once did, but in memory. It remains frozen in time, the driveway with the parked cars, the purses left behind, the restless dog, and the broken porch light. The legacy of the Springfield Three is not only about the disappearance itself, but also about the way it reshaped a community. Springfield, Missouri, once thought of as a safe, unshaken city, was forced to confront the terrifying idea that safety could vanish overnight. Neighbors who once left doors unlocked began to bolt them tightly. Families who once felt secure in their routines began to carry a new awareness of vulnerability. The name Springfield would forever carry a shadow, tied not only to its geography but to its tragedy. For the families of Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy, life has been defined by waiting. Waiting for new leads, waiting for confessions, waiting for evidence to surface. Hope has been both a source of strength and a weight that never lifts. With every passing anniversary, they remind the world that these were not just names in a file, they were a mother, a daughter, and a friend whose lives mattered, whose futures were stolen, and whose absence continues to ache in the hearts of loved ones. The Springfield Three stands alongside other legendary unsolved mysteries, not because of sensational details, but because of its stark simplicity. 3 women, 1 home. 1 night and then nothing. The silence is louder than any theory, and the absence is heavier than any explanation. As we close this story, the haunting lesson remains: some mysteries resist time, and some questions may never be answered. Yet remembering the Springfield Three keeps their story alive. A reminder that behind every unsolved case are real people whose lives deserve justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of America's most perplexing mysteries. If you found this story compelling, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe, so we can continue exploring the world's unsolved enigmas together. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful. And remember, sometimes the quietest streets hide the loudest mysteries.